Hi, everybody tuning in. Welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. I'm your host, James Mackey. Really excited for today's episode. Our guest has a lot of background building and scaling a very successful IT solutions company. And so we're going to be going into exactly what it takes to hire top talent sustainably, everything from interviewing to when you get across that offer to new hires, how to make sure your team is successful. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And today we are joined by Joe Rose. Joe, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you. I'm happy to be here and talk about what we've done, and I think hopefully have some interesting conversations about hiring and growing teams and leadership.
For sure. And so let's, before we jump into the topics, I want everybody to understand a little bit about you and just like what you do, your point of impact, type of company you run, just so, as folks are listening to your advice, we want to know your essentially the perspective you're coming from based on the size of the company and the types of customers you service. So could you give us like a high level 30 seconds to 1 minute, somewhere in there, overview on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I started out of the Navy, and after I was done there, went to a small media company. And at the time, we were trying to grow this team of developers, and they hired this very senior guy who was going to come in and be in charge. And we had a partnership with a college, and we were going to hire 10 interns every year. And he got into a fight with leadership that didn't work out well. And they said, okay, well, who's the most senior looking guy who's got the most wrinkles? Him, he's in charge. And that was me. And so very young age, I had to start hiring a lot of people with a lot of turnover. And I think that really helped me develop through trial and a lot of errors. What does it take to hire good people? Hiring that high volume of people every year. When I left there, I came to JBS and really started that same thing at JBS, because I think we were more focused at the time of how do we grow as a company and sales and stuff like that. And I think we had some people acquisition problems. And I have a soapbox that I like to stand on and talk about the tech interview and what makes a good tech interview. And so we started implementing some of that stuff, and I was passionate about it. And I think that's when you could kind of see the fortunes of the company start to turn a little bit. And then we started hiring better people. We were more successful in projects. We were getting more renewals with our clients. We're delivering better business outcomes. And that's when our business really started to explode. That wasn't all me. There's a lot of people involved in that, obviously. But I think even having a person who has a passion for this and saying, hey, this is something we should talk about and do a better job of, is a huge deal versus something that's just kind of swept under the rug of, what is your interview? Fine, who cares? We got more important things as a company to be talking about. So I like to think that's how I contributed.
Yeah, for sure. And so just for everybody tuning in too, Joe's the president of a company called JBS Solutions. And Joe actually has a technical background. So you came up as an engineer.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I did.
Right. Yep. Okay. So I think that's important to note too. So as people are tuning in, when we're talking about how to hire top tech talent, Joe actually has a technical background, which I think is an important element here that I'm assuming is going to contribute to how you go around screening and interviewing people with a technical background, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, we obviously work with our customers who hire their own folks and have an idea of what their interview processes are. Your typical tech interview is, let me go to the tech manager. What skills do they need? Well, they need React or they need JavaScript or whatever. And they get on an interview and they say, well, how many years of React experience do you have? 4. How would you rate your React capabilities on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, just 8. Oh, okay, great. 8 out of 10 sounds wonderful. And so on. The interviews don't really glean whether the person is actually good at programming or not, but they're more of your traditional, how many years of experience with this thing do you have and how comfortable are you with it? And don't dive much deeper. And then there's a whole lot of soft stuff. What would you say your biggest thing you need to improve is? What would your peers say about you? All that kind of stuff. And that's all well and good. But I think, the kind of the dirty secret of the programmer industry is sometimes you need to hire people who are introverted. They're a little less outgoing and social and maybe don't answer some of those questions as well. And you need to focus more on their technical capabilities and less on their ability to impress HR people, because HR people tend to be pretty personable, right? So they can, when they're evaluating tech talent, they can over-index on that. I like that guy. He was nice. I like that guy. He was outgoing. They could be terrible programmers, and then you've hired a bad engineer.
So what do you like when you're working with your HR and talent counterparts over the years? How do you help them set up their screening calls to make sure that they're only getting through the technical talent that actually is going to have the skill set that you need them to have, right? Because you don't want your calendar booked with a bunch of people you're going to pass on, right? So how do you kind of optimize that conversion rate so the folks they're sending you are at least making it to the round after you, right?
Sure. Now there's a quick tech screening that we'll do, 5 questions that are very, very easy. And that eliminates, I think, 60 or 70% of the candidates. Our interview pass rate is still 40%. So we're still interviewing more bad candidates than good. But prior to doing that, hey, answer these 5 simple questions, it was much worse. I think we were failing 8 out of every 10 people we interviewed. I don't think it's a fair expectation for you to set on a recruiter, someone who's not technical, that they will be able to fully screen out whether someone is a good engineer or not. I just don't think that's reasonable. So I think you almost have to have a process in place that has that understanding that the candidates you get are only going to have a certain amount of vetting. So start out with a 15-minute get to know you with those 5 technical questions, then do a half-hour tech screen, then get into that longer format interview. And you're basically trying to glean, as soon as possible, whether this person can hit the muster or not. But you don't want to invest 2 hours in an interview if you can invest a half hour first and see if they're any good or not.
So and that's an interesting thing that comes up a lot in recruiting circles is when to place the tech assessment or tech test rather, because some companies do run into the issue where they put it too high in the funnel, like the interview process too close to the beginning is a more clear way of saying it. And so candidates have no buy-in. So they're like, why the F should I, do this for you when you haven't given me anything to be excited about? So, and what's interesting is it's not the same for every company. Like some companies seem to be able to get away with having it higher more toward the beginning, and then other companies not so much. So what's been your learning curve there, and what have you seen be effective in terms of when to actually do the tech test?
Sure. No, I think if you're Amazon or you're Google or you're SpaceX, you have a reputation where you can basically make a candidate do whatever you want. They are eager to come work for you. The rest of us don't have that luxury. So having someone with a take-home programming exercise or go to a website and fill out this 100-question questionnaire, they're just not going to do it. There are other jobs out there that pay, competitively and competitive benefits, all that same work-life balance, that aren't making them do that. So they're going to go the path of least resistance. So you have to strike, you're absolutely right. You have to strike that balance, especially as competitive as the market was, last 18 months or so. It's eased a little, but not completely. So that's where I say, 5 simple questions, 5 questions that if you ask me off the top of my head, I'm going to know it instantly. And you can really screen out a lot of terrible candidates just with 5 easy, simple questions. So a Python question might be, what's the difference between a list and a tuple? And if you've ever programmed Python, you're going to instantly know. Boom, here's the answer.
Right. So those questions you're asking, the expectation is that they are giving the answers on the screening call with the recruiter.
Yes. Yeah. And the recruiter has the answer key right in front of them. And the questions are not such that the answers are impossible to understand.
Yeah.
Right. So if I said the difference between a list and a tuple is you can change a list, you can't change a tuple once you create it. Like a recruiter can understand that. They can listen to a candidate describe that answer, know whether they're right or wrong without having to have a degree in computer science. So when 5 simple questions also need to have 5 simple answers.
So what are your thoughts on ChatGPT? Do you feel like that's going to throw a wrench in this strategy? Is it going to be able to just spit out the answers that people need now?
You can always tell.
Yeah.
You can always tell. Human beings, if I ask you, what's your belt size? You're going to say 32. You're not going to say processing.
You're not going to say there's a variety of factors that may influence that.
No, I'll be honest with you. It's tough to tell people cheating on an interview. The biggest indicator is the lag. Other than that, it's really hard.
Biggest
to tell.
indicator is the lag.
If you ask them an easy question and it takes just as long to answer as a hard question, and there's that 10-second, 15-second pause. That's why having doing interviews on video obviously is you have to see if their eyes are scanning left to right.
Going video interviews and then the lag. That's kind of interesting. That's a point that I actually haven't heard of before, which seems kind of shocking because it's as soon as you said that, it's duh. But I never actually thought about that. And we've hired, of course, a ton of technical talent for our customers. But you're right. If there's a significant lag, then it becomes quite obvious. I would hope, right?
And we ask questions that stack, so they're harder to Google.
Right.
So
Right.
what's an index in a database? What's the underlying data structure? What's the big O notation for adding data to that data structure? So you see how those questions stack on the previous question and
Yeah.
answer. That's hard to Google that kind of stuff. So there are
Yeah.
ways you can structure the interview to make it more difficult to cheat.
Yeah. That's really smart. Do any other, so we came up with three, you came up with we, that's very that's definitely not we, you did. So the biggest ways to tell someone's cheating, it's okay, there's a lag, or just to make sure they don't, right? Like just tell if there's a lag, to do a video interview, to ask questions that stack. Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Uh,
That's a
hard
pretty solid
work,
list.
reference checks.
Yeah.
You know, the people who are doing the cheating, you know, if you can get it in a miracle world, if you can get a blind reference of, hey, they worked at this company, I know somebody over there, that's the best way to validate someone. If not, you can try to do a reference check and just poke around the edges.
Yeah.
It is tough. I mean, is there any way to truly know that someone isn't cheating? No. But you can make it a little bit harder on them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, it's like if people are in that mindset, they may just, if you make it too difficult, they may just kind of drop out, right? I one
Yeah.
method that I did, this is like, more maybe like a typical, I don't know, recruiting HR. I wouldn't say it's typical actually, because not a lot of people know how to do this, but one of the things that I will always do when I was a hands-on recruiter is like I would talk about reference checks in the screening interview. So I would be like, hey, like Eric, just so you know, the last step of our process is we're going to check
Yep.
references from previous direct managers. What's the name of the manager at your prior role? Okay, it's Joe. Okay, Joe Rose. Okay, and was he your direct manager? Yes. Okay, so when I speak with Joe, how is he going to rank your performance 1 out of 10? And for whatever reason, when you phrase it like that, like when I speak with Joe, people have a tendency. First, it kind of takes them out of their pattern, right? Like you're breaking a pattern, and it throws them off, and they answer a lot more honestly. So I've had like plenty of people saying like 6, and you're looking for at least an 8. But
Yeah.
I follow that up, and I would say, okay, so they give you an 8, which you want at least. If they're not an 8, pass, right? Just to be clear, because people, they do tell you the truth when you do this, by the way. But then the next question is like, okay, so what will Joe say you do exceptionally well? What are you best at? And you give them an opportunity to brag about themselves, like what they're really good at. Give me an example of that. What do you think about that? Or how did you do that? Or, you can kind of dive into details, right? So they might say like, oh, well, there was this huge problem with X, Y, and Z. And so this is how I went about solving it. So it's another way to kind of just dig deeper as well. But then the other reason you're asking that question is so you can answer the next one. Is like, well, what is Joe going to say was an area for improvement? Maybe something you didn't do as well at. And again, people are pretty honest. So then you go down that rabbit hole. And I've had candidates tell me like, that they got in like verbal fights and, all sorts of shit. And so you can actually glean a lot. And what's interesting too is that even if somebody hypothetically were to lie, usually they're going to ghost you. If you've told them you're going to check the previous direct, then they're not going to follow up. Now, I will be honest, like candidates usually hate, like if I was to post about this on LinkedIn, there would be a ton of like people in the world that would just say, like, oh,
you suck. You're wrong with you're corporate America. Yeah, no.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, screen people in, not out. It's like, that kind of bullshit. Yeah. But the thing is that I would just say like, somebody doesn't necessarily need to be able to get a reference from all the previous direct managers. Like if there was a reason that they can't, then obviously employers needs to be reasonable and take certain things into consideration. Like some companies may not provide background checks or reference checks. Like that's just, it's legally not something or it's a policy that they don't do it rather. Some people might've had some type of like abusive manager leadership. All of these things are legitimate reasons. Somebody could even say like, look, I'd rather not get into the details. However, I'm not able to provide a reference from this company, or I'm not comfortable. Like those things are still okay. It's not that it's like a hard and fast rule, but we do have to make kind of a judgment call based on the feedback that we're getting from the candidates. Right. And so I always found that method incredibly helpful, and it really helped me clear out my pipeline with people that I knew were more likely, that I wanted to be down funnel, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, it does make sense. And I think it also helps capture some of what we've seen a lot of in our industry, which is fraud. If you're
Mhm.
working 5 full-time jobs at a time, to me, that's fraudulent. There's no way you can put in that many hours. But there are there are people out there doing it and doing the bare minimum on a job for 2 weeks and then disappearing and still getting paid and going to the next one. And so when
Yeah.
you start talking about reference checks and you're going to be talking to the manager of their so-called primary job, they start to sweat a little bit. Like, no, I don't want the company to know that I'm interviewing for other jobs because I still work there. And so that it can uncover some of that
Right.
stuff too.
And that's tough too, because like one of the things, right, that can help clear that stuff up is if they put like the company name on their LinkedIn profile when they start a new
Hmm.
job, right? And like there's that whole argument,
Hmm.
like, well, that's my personal LinkedIn profile. So sometimes we've actually had customers too. It's like, set an expectation in the interview process, like, hey, we're aware this is your personal profile. However, while you're working here, you are representing our brand, and there's an expectation that boom, boom, boom,
Yep. Yeah,
and
we do
so
that. Yeah.
yeah, you do. Yeah. So
Hmm. Yeah.
that's something I think we do as well. Which it's only happened to us one time where I guess I technically don't have evidence, but like we hired one guy, it's like a couple years back where like he didn't update his LinkedIn profile. He's being super cagey and weird. And like you just get the vibe, right? We're just like, this
We
guy
had that
is,
happen twice this year.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I think
like them not
it's
wanting to
more,
update their LinkedIn is a red flag of, it's not like it cost you $100 to do it,
yeah.
All right. So you're either embarrassed to be working here, which ain't good, or there's something else nefarious going on. Like there's no good answer as to why you wouldn't want to update your LinkedIn.
No, there's no legitimate answer. Like people will
No.
take like a privacy stance, or it's like, oh, BS. Like, why do you have a LinkedIn then?
Oh,
Like,
I
I don't.
completely agree with everyone's right to
Oh,
privacy.
me too. I'm just saying. I think it's
But that being
BS when they
said,
say it. Like,
LinkedIn is not about privacy. Social media is not about privacy. You're putting that information out there for a reason. So I don't think it's unreasonable. Now, if somebody said, I don't have a LinkedIn profile, so I have nothing to update on, I don't care.
okay,
Great. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm not going to argue with you. But
a
if you
little
have
weird,
one,
but
you're already not private. You've already kind of crossed that
right.
threshold.
What are you using it for exactly? If like if not to reflect where you're working and building your network and your brand.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, agreements on that. Well, so let's see here. I think let's like from a cultural perspective, right? Like there
Mhm.
is we kind of got into how to recognize or how to optimize top of funnel interviews to ensure that we can hopefully get skilled talent, technical talent that's actually good and competent in our funnel, and to clear out the ones that maybe are not the right fit. Let's talk more like culture, common sense, not always so common, but just general high level kind of things that you look for when it comes to how they're interacting with you and the team, if you think that they're going to get along with their direct managers, or is there any other kind of like more so soft skill advice? I know that obviously, particularly on the engineering side, there's going to be a lot of introverts. That's not really what I'm referring to, but just in terms
Mhm.
of somebody's ability to communicate and collaborate internally with their team, is there stuff that you look for, and how do you vet that?
Bluntly, I would say it's lower on our totem pole than the actual pure technical skills. I mean, for someone who's a developer, they might spend 30 hours a week in front of their computer and 10 hours a week with their peers. And so if you're interviewing for the 10 instead of the 30, are you really focused on what they need to be good at? That's not saying that we don't have a strong emphasis on this point, or we ignore them altogether, I should say, but it's not a strong an emphasis for us. It's the strong technical skills. So what we try to do is give what I would call a progressive scale of difficulty on our interview questions. They start out easy, get progressively harder and harder and harder until we get a candidate to say that they don't know. And I haven't met one that we haven't been able to stump yet, just because you have a bunch of experts on the phone in a bunch of different fields. Nobody can know everything. What's interesting about that, you might think, okay, well, that's a great way to get their technical background. How do you get their people skills, those soft skills? Getting someone to discuss that they think they know an answer, but they're not sure, and you can give them hints and tease them towards a solution. It becomes more interactive. You see how they discuss technical ideas. Frankly, you can see what their temper's like. We've interviewed people where it was clear they weren't getting the answers. They got frustrated. They got mad. Some of them just up and leave the interview. Yeah, that's not somebody we want to work with. So it's kind of a two-faced way of answering your question of me saying it's not important or we don't focus on it, but then also saying it's something we get a lot of detail on in the technical aspect of it. It's true. I mean, we do get a lot of soft skill stuff when we're heavily focused on the tech stuff.
Joe, I love that. I love that. You know, it's also kind of funny about that too. It's like, I imagine if I was like on one of your interviews at towards the beginning, be like, oh, I'm crushing this. Like I'm doing so,
That's how it should feel, right? You want to build
Right.
some confidence because you
Right.
do have to get people over that nervousness, right? Of
Yeah.
imposter syndrome, or did I study enough, or whatever. And so giving them a few, if you want a football reference, give them a few check down passes, get some completions in the belt before you have them throw the ball down the field. Warm
Yeah.
up that rookie quarterback a bit.
Yeah, that's really good advice. We've covered so much practical good advice that folks can implement already. Let's talk about, okay, so we in the prep we discussed hiring for leadership, and
Mhm.
you mentioned that you had better experience upskilling individual contributors into leadership roles rather than hiring leaders externally. Can you walk us through your philosophy, get into tactical how you really do it, a couple
Sure,
stories, stuff like that?
sure. I mean, in my opinion, finding out if someone is a good leader or not is incredibly difficult to do. It's almost something that you don't know if they're good at it until you see them do it, right? Because there's so many facets to being a good leader. Setting a good example, uh, being respectful, giving people dignity, mentoring, and so on. That to think that you can derive how a leader is going to behave in a work setting in an hour or 2 hour, or even 4 hour interview, I think is a bit of a stretch. I think it's very challenging. So our philosophy is, 99.9% of the time, we're going to promote leaders from within. We're going to take our best technical people out of our hiring pipeline, hire them. And the law of averages say that maybe 1 out of every 10, 2 out of every 10 people that we hire is also going to have some leadership chops. And so we're going to develop that leader. We're going to put them through kind of what I call the pyramid of leadership. You learn, first thing you have to learn as a leader is how to set a good example. So that means being a good individual contributor yourself. That's the fundamental thing that you have to do. Because you can't have a leader telling people not to be late when they show up late every day, or telling people not to be lazy when they are themselves lazy. Then from there, you have to learn how to lead other people, and by that, a leader leading individual contributors. It's that first tier in the pyramid. And so the general philosophy there is you want the people you are leading to be doing as good a job as you would do if you were doing it yourself, or better. Like, how do you get them to be doing things the same way? And so that's from the behavior control element of it. Like you need people to do things a certain way, make sure that happens. The means are really important too. You want to inspire and motivate people to do stuff. There's a carrot and there's a stick. You want to use more of the carrot than the stick, because we're not in the military. You're not going to get screaming in people's faces is not a great way to motivate people in a business environment. You'll see a short-term lift in productivity for maybe a week or a month, and then it'll just collapse after that. So we get our people, put them in the funnel. We find 1 or 2. They learn how to lead individual contributors, and then you start to say, okay, of the 10 people we have leading individual contributors, who are the 1 or 2 who can lead other leaders, who can teach other people about leadership and train them how to lead, and listen to them talk about what's going on with their team and give them pointed advice. Because every leader at some point, they're going to have someone that works for them that they don't understand what makes that person tick. So I'm more blunt. I have a problem with passive personalities, where if they don't like something I'm doing, like, hey, how's it going? How are you enjoying your interactions with me so far? Well, hey, it's great. The other people would queue up on that and go, hey, that was a somewhat reserved answer. What's going on? Talk to me. And I'd be like, okay, you said it's great. It means it's great. And there can be the opposite side of it too. The people who are real passive and, hey, maybe you could get better here. And they're talking to somebody who's an introverted, blunt guy. And he's like, maybe doesn't mean anything. I'm just going to ignore the guy. So, that's that next tier. And then on and on. How do you set a strategy and a vision for an entire company and all that? But generally speaking, it takes months, it takes years to have people move from one level of the pyramid to the next. And it's a 2-part process. You're training them, you're giving them feedback. Here's how you get better out of it. And you're also saying there's some underlying natural talent in there too. Some people have it, some people don't. And so you're recognizing that and bringing it to the surface and kind of straining out the best.
Yeah, I think so. And I think emotional intelligence is kind of buzzy. I mean, for me, it's like, I think sometimes it's a bit instinctual, like people that get it, have it, where you
Mhm.
need to be able to read somebody to some extent. And determine a little bit about how they're wired. And I guess the part that's like in how they feel about what you just said, or their own performance or whatever else. The part that can be, I think, more easily trained is like how you respond to that. But you can't be tone deaf. You have to be able to pick up on nuances in conversation, body language,
Yep.
tone, word choice, and be able to interpret that and then kind of customize a response to get the most out of that person to help them be the best version of themselves. And so to me, that's like the hardest part. It's with finding a good leader is like, sometimes people have a tendency to, they want to lead people the way that they would want to be led. And the reality is that leadership is very situational, and you have to understand the personality that you're working
Mhm.
with, and you need to help them learn in a way that is going to be well received by them. So if like if I'm super type A, blunt, straightforward person, but I'm working with somebody that is, the polar opposite of that. If I go in there and just say, you got to do this, 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 and that, let's go pick it up. That person is not going to thrive. In fact, they might even collapse and their performance is going to get
Mhm.
worse. They're going to be very stressed.
100%.
Their cortisol is going to skyrocket and they're just going to have a terrible time. And so you have to know like how to make that adjustment. And so that's like sometimes, you have the people that are super ambitious or whatever. But they also have to learn like, hey, to lead means it's situational. It's not a one size fits all. You have to know the different personalities on your team and how to get the most out of them. I will say that I've typically promoted the people that are the best ICs. I think that I think everybody's heard this. I haven't really found it to be true where they say like, well, you know, somebody doesn't have to be a great individual contributor to be a great leader. Sometimes people are better at leadership. I'm not saying that every great individual contributor would be a good leader. However, I'm saying that like every good leader that I think I've worked with was at least pretty damn good at their job as an individual contributor. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, you don't have to be a great programmer to be a great leader, but you do have to set the example. You have to do the underlying things. So show up to work on time, work hard, uh, you know, check in your code at the end of the day like you're supposed to, update your tasks in Jira like you're supposed to, like those fundamental things. So I would agree with you to an extent. Like you you don't have to be a guy who's winning programming contests left and right to be a good leader, but you do have to do the things, the baseline expectations, the kind of the non-talent based, in other words, parts of your job versus the actual pure programming is more talent based. Um, I kind of think of it this way. There's one piece of advice that I would give someone, and I'd say ignore everything else I said, but just remember this one thing. As a leader, it's easy to feel good about something you're doing based on the noise you're making. I gave a really confident speech and it felt great. I had a talk with someone and I empathized with them and it felt wonderful. But leadership is measured by its results, not by the noise you make. If you're not affecting a change in behavior, then whatever you're doing is not working, no matter how good you feel about it. So, keep that in mind. And so back to your point about, do they have to be a good individual contributor or not? People who have that ability to measure what they're doing and improve versus the people who just kind of coast and are unsteerable ships, they tend to be good individual contributors and they tend to be good leaders because they have that ability to watch and observe, and what's working they keep doing and what's not working they stop.
Yeah, they're adaptable. They continuously improve. They're intellectually curious,
Mhm.
not only
Yep.
about the technology they're working on, but the people they work with.
Humble. You got to be able to admit that you did, no matter how good you felt like something went, there's some aspect of it that you did wrong that you could improve on.
Right. And if you're really ambitious and you really want to be the best, then you need to have enough humility to work on yourself.
Mhm.
Like if you just put
Absolutely.
this wall, like I can never do any wrong, then like you're ultimately going to stagnate because at some point you've stopped
Yeah.
learning. And I, quite honestly, a lot of successful people I know get to that point where it's like you'll even talk to them like, oh, what do you like do outside of work? Are you working on anything, taking any classes, or do you have a peer group? They're like, no, I already know all that stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, but you've been in the same position for the last 10 years. It's like, maybe you don't.
Well, I think that's really challenging. Think about take a guy like Elon Musk. Uh, who is sitting in his inner circle telling him, "Hey, you fucked that up"?
I hope
That whole
someone
Twitter thing.
probably.
But probably not people that
Right.
he's friendly with, right? For the
Yeah.
most part, the higher up you rise, the more you tend to get people who just say, "You're doing great, you're wonderful, thank you." There's a certain fear of this guy can change my pay, or this guy could, whatever. And so the higher up in the leadership ranks you get, the more difficult it is to get feedback. That's not just people blowing smoke up your butt. So you do have to have tremendous, at least try to. I try and fail at it. I'm terrible. I have a huge ego. You do have to try to have that sense of humility of, I have to realize that it's something wrong here. And I also have to realize that it's going to be unnatural for people to tell me what it was or where I can improve.
That's where you got to be able to read people, right? Like when somebody's giving you feedback, like if it's the real thing or if there's something to uncover, and how to like tactfully push and help people feel like safe and kind of tell them quite honestly, like, I don't want yes men or women or I want people that are legitimately going to partner with me and help us be the best version of ourselves. Like this isn't about my ego. This is about, it's really going to boost my ego is getting scaling a very successful company.
That's right.
I mean, like at the end of the day, it's like, let's focus on our job is to create a profitable and sustainable business at scale. And if we're doing that, then we can pat ourselves on the back. I don't care about being tactically right about one decision. I care about our 5-year plan.
And you have to tell people that.
Right.
Yeah.
You do.
You can't just assume that they know that. You have to tell them like, hey, I want you to hurt my feelings. I want you to give me feedback. If there's one thing, and there's ways you can sneak around it, like, hey, well, how do you think that went? Oh, it went great. Then you get a nugget. Right? Your hand a little bit, like, give me one thing I better, listen to better, or whatever. So that's tough.
It's that, saying like, well, that went great. I didn't think it went that great. Or I thought we could have done this or that, or I think too, it's like,
give them something you mess up. I really know I fucked that up. And then there are times that they'll pile on, and you're like, geez, all right.
Just relax a little bit. And I think it's like anything else too. With employee surveys or like you're just conversations, right? If somebody gives like feedback on an improvement, if you can do it. Like if you can make the shift, right? Because it's like when employees ask for improvements, if you never act on any of them, then they're going to stop giving them to you, right? And so it's responding in a way that makes it feel welcomed, like not getting defensive. And it's also actually trying to implement something. And sometimes you can't, because sometimes people will recommend things, but they don't necessarily have your perspective because they have a different point of impact in the business. And they just don't see like, this would be great for an individual contributor, but this isn't going to work for us at scale at this point of where we are as a company. So, but like still like giving them that feedback and explaining, okay, this is what we can do. We can't do this because of this XYZ implication, right?
And we try to be transparent on stuff like that. Why don't we have much better XYZ paternity policy or PTO policy or pay scale XYZ? It's at the end of the day, we are a for-profit business, and there are certain financial parameters that we need to operate the business under. And so that's why we can't, we don't make the same money that Amazon or Google does. That's why we can't pay like Amazon or Google. We're going to try to make your life happy some other way, whether it be culture, work from home, tapping your week at 40 and not bothering you on nights and weekends, whatever, the kind of stuff that those other companies maybe don't necessarily do as good of a job at. But it goes back to me, the transparency is really important. And you either have to give them the yes they're looking for, or be really transparent about why you're telling them no.
It's not rocket science, right? Like, but it's still a lot of companies mess this up. And one of the things I like talking about when it comes to attracting talent is we reference Elon Musk earlier, like you don't need a mission like we're going to put people on Mars to attract great talent. And you don't necessarily need like the top percentile of comp. Like I say, it's always good to target like 75, 80% percentile in compensation. But that's usually where it's like, it's aggressive, but it's sustainable, because the way that there's always going to be somebody willing to outbid you, right?
No, for sure.
And even if they're running their business in an unsustainable way. So if somebody receives a ton of funding and they're going out, or potentially they're hiring people at insane rates, like just because they could be out of business next year, or they could be cutting half of their staff because they did it in an unsustainable way. So you can't just look at a top bidder and be like, oh, we're not competitive. You got to be competitive overall in the market, but never try to be the top bidder. And what you said, like, you don't need that, in terms of like not offering other things for most businesses, besides like the best comp or, a really kind of cool, compelling mission. Sometimes the mission could be like, we're going to help you get the most out of life professionally and personally. We're going to provide a holistic package that has different things. We are going to Yeah, I think capping capacity, what you just said about 40-hour work weeks, that's huge. Like if you can guarantee to somebody, or the vast majority of the time, maybe not guarantee, but you can say the majority of the time you're going to be working X amount, or we're going to cap your capacity at this. People love that because so many companies don't do that. And the way that they built their margins as a company is that they have to push people like beyond their
Over
limit.
allocate. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they just create this burnout wheel, like flywheel. And like, if you just max capacity, it's going to produce better outcomes for the customers. You're going to have better retention rates, which I think is something else we want to talk to. Like you guys have a very low attrition rate, right?
Yeah, it's traditionally 3% or less. I think during COVID, it got up around 5%, which would be high for us.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, again, like it's about how you treat folks, the opportunities you give them, and then also just kind of maxing out capacity. Like, again, like I try to, as much as possible, view my role as CEO as to how do I help people working at this company get the most out of life, period, not just professionally, overall. How can I give them a great experience? And, sometimes I can't. Like, to be honest, like in this market, we're doing recruiting in the tech industry. Like, a lot of companies are going through layoffs. It's not, I don't have as many levers as I had last year to create great experiences. It's harder. But you always do as much as you can, is the point. And I think when you do that, it's overall, you're going to win. You're going to get enough great people on your team. You don't have to appeal to everybody. You have to appeal to a segment of the market that you're trying to attract. And
100%. Yeah. A guy who's just looking at the biggest salary number, I'll do the best I can, but probably not going to attract that person.
Yeah. And like sometimes going towards the biggest salary isn't even the smartest decision. You have to.
No, it's hard to argue with people in that mentality, though.
It is
somewhat mercenaries, but
right.
The flip side of that is that really the person you want working for you? Because our corporate philosophy is we want this to be the best place in the world to work. You have to realize that there are certain constraints that we have. If we could pay everyone $10 million a year and give them 500, days of PTO a year, we would. We can't. So within the boundaries of being a successful business, we want this to be the best place in the world to work. And I think for the most part, our employees are bought in on that. The suggestions we get on how we can change a culture usually aren't just give us more money. They're actually material things that we can do to make their lives better, that just cost us a little bit of time and energy, but not necessarily bankrupt us. And that's great. It's a wonderful feeling to know that, we're all in this together. And I think there's a sense of, by keeping it transparent, you could pick any developer in the company and put him in my shoes. And would he make the same decision I made when it comes to all this stuff? No, he wouldn't. We're all smart people looking at the same financial constraints. We're trying to make this the best place in the world to work. That kind of naturally lends itself to optimized decisions around PTO and pay and benefits and work-life balance and all that kind of stuff. So if that's your culture, which I like to believe that ours is somebody who's going after every penny of annual salary, their goals aren't necessarily aligned with ours. We're looking to do something more. We're looking to have a business that's both successful financially, but also successful with a core philosophy of treating people well. And that's what makes our clients want to engage with us, because our folks are happy to come to work and they're there's a difference working with somebody who's fulfilled and happy and somebody who's miserable. Who would you rather work with? Even for something silly, like if you went to Wendy's and you're going to order a burger, would you rather have a cashier who's happy to be there or somebody who's just absolutely miserable?
Right. And that's like the whole maxing capacity thing and building a business and pricing strategy and everything around like unit economics where people are not burning out is great for business. Like we just did our net promoter score. I don't know if you guys run campaigns like that, but we send out, like we just did it for the first time. Actually, you guys probably got one. We rolled it out for the first time where we asked all our customers like, hey, how we're doing. And like we did the research and apparently like anything over 50% is considered pretty decent. We just concluded the campaign and we got 90%, which is like basically unheard of.
That's eye-popping. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's nuts, right? Like I was happily surprised. I mean, I knew we'd do like well, like I had total faith in my leadership team and Bridget, but but damn, right? And like we're leading 3 categories on G2, which is an online review site for the tech industry. And I really do believe that like the number one reason we've been able to do that is because we max capacity, because so many recruiters are used to working in an environment where they're working on like 30 recs at once. They're constantly burnt out. And then like the hiring managers are pissed off because like they're not getting the results that the hiring manager wants to see. And so by doing that, we were able to attract a caliber of people that we had, like, before we did this, we had never been able to get. Like it really was a game changer for us. And again, like, I'm not putting people on Mars. Like, I'm doing recruiting services, but we've
Yeah.
still able to attract amazing people based on our mission, which is like to help people get the most out of life. Like for you, it's like being the best company to work for, like similar
Mhm.
philosophy, right? It's basically, I think, very similar, if not the same, right?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean,
Yeah.
the reality is that people's productivity, it's scale. You know, do they have stuff going on at home? Are they physically tired? Are they sick? Are they happy to be at your workplace? And so, how do you scale a business if you have more demand? You can either add more people or get more out of the people you have. And I would make the argument that happier people are more productive. I'd rather have one happy person than two unhappy people. Or even one happy person working 40 hours a week, I think, will beat the brakes off of someone working 80 hours a week. They may work 80 hours a week and get more done than that first person for maybe a month. It's not sustainable. And eventually it's going to come crashing down and you're going to see this productivity drop. So what are you going to do? You're going to hire a second person to work them 80 a week and a third and work them 80 a week. And that whole time, my one person working 40 hours a week is, again, beating the brakes off of your productivity. And that's what our customers are telling us. Why are your folks so much faster and so much more productive? Like these fundamental
Yeah.
things, we're all human beings. We're all on this planet together. None of us want to be worked to death or worked at, every ounce to the bone. But when we're happy and fulfilled, we work harder. It's a fact.
Yeah. Yeah. It's less productive to be too strict and put too much on people's plates. I mean, I remember
Yep.
my first corporate job, I was a SDR for sales development rep for a, publicly traded company, staffing company. And the culture was very much like that. Like, what do they call it? Like a bullpen, like where everybody's in the cubicle, like one big room,
Yep.
everybody listening in on each other's conversations, like just hardcore old school fucking suit and tie sitting at the
Yep.
desk. Like, I'm very grateful for it, but like, I did not enjoy it. I appreciated the opportunity, but I did not enjoy it. It was really tough. And it was like one of those environments where you just like, even if you were having like, you're just some days like you're just drained, right? And
Yeah.
like you just had to sit at the desk and like act busy, but like your brain was fucking gone and you weren't being productive. Like it's just not human nature to just grind it out like a machine every second of every day. And I think it probably actually like hurt results in many
Oh,
cases.
no doubt. If an SDR calls me and I can tell they're miserable, I don't want to talk to them.
Right. Or like overly stressed or like have too
Oh,
high
yeah.
of a quota.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
gonna lose their job if they don't impress you. you know?
No, it's absurd. It harkens back to a time of I've got a work gang digging ditches and I need to yell at them to get them to dig that ditch faster. We don't live in a workforce now where that's the case, where hitting people with a stick makes them work faster. For the most part, we're all knowledge workers, and that requires people who are rested and happy.
Yeah. For sure. Hey, so we're kind of coming up on time here. I think we covered a lot of ground. I'm really excited about this episode. A lot of value, a lot of value. So thank you. And I was kind of curious to get your thoughts on ChatGPT, AI. Like, how do you think it's going to impact like technical roles over the next 5 years? What do you think?
It's interesting. I'm sure you've played with it and had it generate stuff, and you go, "Yeah, this ain't bad. This kind of sort of tangentially got close to what I wanted." Code that does that is some of the worst code you can put into a platform, because a bad developer writes a bunch of code. It kind of sort of does what they want, and then they peck at it, make a change here, make a change here, make a change here, make a change here. And then finally they get it working. It's got 7 bugs, but they got it working and they call it done. A truly brilliant engineer is going to think for an hour before they write a single line of code. They're going to write it once. It's going to be done. So you have the generative capabilities of the AI will be able to displace the bottom part of the market. But what you're going to get is code very similar to what the bottom of the market produces. I mean, by definition, these things are derivative. They're taking existing work and just spitting it back out. If you are having people write software that already exists, you're crazy. I mean, you should be writing something new that doesn't exist, right? If it already exists, just go buy it. So I think there's a lot more fear there than reality. Like even take harken back to the scare of the 90s, outsourcing was going to eliminate all US based consulting roles. And what do people find out? Well, in order for a developer overseas to be productive, you need a really good business analyst to capture requirements properly. And if you fed the requirements into the machine improperly, and the machine in this case was the offshore developers, you'd get a bad result. So how is ChatGPT going to be any different? If you feed in incomplete or bad requirements, you're going to get code that doesn't do the job. So for something really complicated, like say, I don't know, tax law or the navigation system for a space shuttle, by the time you write the requirements document and tweak and tune and put in all the cases and exceptions and then feed it into ChatGPT, you might as well have just programmed it. So yeah, I like I said, I think it's going to displace the bottom end of the market, but I think it's going to be a hollow promise in the sense that it's not a true artificial general intelligence in the sense that it can understand larger goals. I mean, what is this stuff under the hood? It's a statistical inference of, you asked for something, let me go find similar somethings and assemble them together and then present that back to you as the result. What about that would you say, yeah, that's going to upend our workforce of hiring developers? It's incredible for things, for very specific use cases. I've got support agents. They're constantly asked the same questions all the time from our users. We have this giant database of support answers, but they're asking the question in a slightly different way. Well, a derivative of our support base in a way specifically answering that question is perfect. It hits the goal. You don't need that support agent anymore. There are certain areas of labor in our economy where derivative work is perfectly fine, and it will displace those jobs, but I don't think it's going to be higher end programmers.
From like, okay, so let's say you take a brilliant engineer, like top tier engineers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that do you think like in the next 5 years, they're going to be leveraging AI to work more efficiently? Or
certainly.
Like,
no, absolutely. Yeah. You could see a situation where they plug in, hey, give me this, and this, and assemble it together in such a way. And then that's a head start. They come in over the top and finish it. Or it looks at code and makes recommendations that find certain patterns or things like that. But that's just an improvement of tooling that makes developers more efficient. I mean, we made them more efficient when we said, hey, here's the cloud and you no longer have to worry about infrastructure, or here's more modern programming languages. So you're using, Python or JavaScript now instead of assembler or COBOL. That the overall demand for programmers outstripped the productivity improvements that we saw there. It didn't completely eliminate the industry.
Yeah, those are all very good analogies. Thank you for sharing with our team here and everybody tuning in. Very valuable insights. I think this is probably a good stopping point. Otherwise, we might just be going up like right to the end and we're going to be rushed. But yeah, what do you think? Is this you feeling good about what we did so far? I think we're at a good place to end. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Cool. Well, Joe, thank you. We appreciate you coming on the show. This was very valuable, and I can't wait to have you back on. We got to do this again.
Yeah, I likewise. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Of course. And for everybody tuning in, thank you for joining us today. We are releasing a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern. If you or somebody that you know would like to be a guest on the show, we are currently accepting applications for VPs, CEOs, VPs, talent acquisition, chief people officers, and founder CEOs, presidents of organizations to come on and talk about anything related to talent acquisition, people, all that good stuff. So anyways, if you're getting value from the show, we definitely appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. And if there's any topics that you want us to discuss, you can reach out on talenttrends.io, shoot us an email, and let us know which topics would be helpful for us to review in a future episode. Thanks so much. And we'll talk to you next time. Take care.